Hey, and welcome to another episode of the Ice Cream for Everyone podcast. I'm your host, Willem van der Horst. This is a podcast where I have conversations with creators, game designers, thinkers, writers, strategists, people generally involved in some part of what I do for a living, which is marketing and brand strategy, or one of my main interests, which is in gaming, and particularly a lot of my background and personal interest is in tabletop gaming, so role-playing games and board games. And so people who make those games or people who are into marketing and strategy, where do they come from? What are they about? What are their stories? Where do they grow up? What inspires them? And really just have these fun-flowing conversations as much as possible and let them speak and tell their stories. And a lot of the people I interview are just generally interesting people. And I choose people I'm interested in and people I'm interested in learning more from, essentially. And that's what happens in the podcast. And I ask a few questions about ice cream, and as much as possible, I don't really give. It's like audio ice cream because everybody likes ice cream one way or another, and that's kind of what I have in mind. It's a way to. It's something that's fun. It's something that's easy, and that's what I have in mind for the show. What have I got going on? So for those who don't know, actually, I'm in London town, and we've had a few days of really nice weather. Topped today while I was editing the episode with a really big storm, so you can't really have more than kind of 2.5 days of sunny time in London. I'm exaggerating, but not, people who live here know that it's not by much. So, we have a tropical storm after 2 days at 25 degrees, which is hilarious. Well, in light of having lived in Singapore and in Southeast Asia for several years, where you have ridiculous tropical storms after a lot longer than 2 days at 25 degrees, because most days are more than 25 degrees anyway. But I will stop whining and complaining about that because we did have 2 lovely days. And I'm very proud of myself because I started exercising again. That happens to be, we'll see if this year changes the pattern, but typically I kind of like exercise about once a year. I'm a pretty lazy person. Once a year and start exercising, for a month or 2, and then something happens and I forget about it until the following year. But I started swimming, so that's pretty good. And I want to keep it up, of course. So I'm looking at buying the card and trying to see, okay, well, if I'm buy the card to the swimming pool, am I going to keep going or am I going to stop going as soon as I buy the card? Let's find out. Time will tell. In most likelihood, I'm not going to talk about it, and then you'll hear me like in a year's time, for those who follow, go, hey, I started exercising again this year. But we'll see. Anyway, what else is going on? If you enjoy the show, don't forget that you can review the show on iTunes. And for those who, I'm sure pretty much everyone uses the iPhone podcast app, which is actually connected to iTunes, for those who don't know. But just if you look on the show, I think you should be able to leave a rating and a review on the iTunes podcast app or any other podcast app you use, give it a thumbs up if you use Stitcher, subscribe to the show, download more episodes, of course, check out, if you enjoy this one, check out more of them. But you can also find out more ice cream content on the Ice Cream for Everyone website. So that's www.icecreamforeveryone.net. And that's ice cream like the cream with ice, right? Not ice cream talking loud. Foreveryone.net, everything spelled out. And you can find my newsletter. The weekly newsletter is called Ice Cream Sunday. See what I did there? And you can find some other random blog posts. You can find more details about what I do for a living. If ever you need any marketing, branding advice, I'm there. And you can also find Ice Cream for Everyone on Facebook. If you like the show, you can leave a comment on Facebook. I'm just really happy to get feedback, essentially. Just, or Twitter. I'm at HippoWill on Twitter. So you can tweet at me and tell me, hey, your show was cool. Or, hey, your show was crap. Or whatever in between, something. But let's move on. Today on the show, I'm joined by my good friend Julien of the French-speaking podcast I regularly contribute to his podcast called Les Voix d'Altaride, The Voices of Altaride. And we go back to the world of tabletop role-playing games with Greg Stolze. Greg is a game designer, writer, and novelist, and he's particularly known for all his work on tabletop role-playing games. He has an extensive career on that, and I was really looking forward to the conversation because he co-designed one of my favorite games called Unknown Armies. And they recently went through a crowdfunding campaign for the 3rd edition of the game and raised over $250,000 to bring the project to life. I'm really looking forward to the final product. It looks like they're going to be able to produce a beautiful book with the publisher Atlas Games. And I played a campaign of Unknown Armies, the 2nd edition, with a group of friends in the south of France last year. That was great fun. So hi guys, if ever you're listening to this. And we had a fun conversation. I'm glad. And we touched on themes that hadn't been discussed on the podcast so far with any of my previous guests who are role-playing game designers as well. So we particularly talked about different types of horror games. We talked about ethical and moral dilemmas and why it's fun or interesting to include those kind of dilemmas to play in games. And that's role-playing games, but a lot of it applies to any kind of games, right? And any kind of gaming experiences. We talked about the ways to approach game rules and systems. What kind of rules should you create to reinforce an atmosphere, reinforce the setting that you're trying to put together? So everything is usually very approachable. It's as much as possible. For those who don't know, I try to have those conversations approachable. If we talk about anything too geeky, we explain it. And the idea is that it's really approachable and interesting for both people who are really into tabletop role-playing games and people who aren't as well. So don't feel left out if you're not much of a tabletop player. This is for you too. There's a lot of stories. We talk about also like spirits and a bunch of, both ghosts. And at the end of the show, we talk about booze and brands of spirits. Anyway, that's a whole other thing. But, we go over a bunch of different conversations. I should note, there's a few fade-offs, distortions in speech towards the end. I'm very sorry about that. It's one of those, it occasionally happens with Skype. I thought it was really horrible during the call, but actually while I was editing, I realized most of it is actually okay. It's really just the last few minutes that have a little bit of distortion, but it's really not too bad, I think. But I managed to get most of the conversation okay. Just apologies for the little glitches. So without further ado, here's Greg Stolze and Julien Poire of Les Voix d'Altaride. Welcome to the both of you. Thank you very much for making time. I really appreciate it. So we're having the conversation with Greg, and Greg, you're a game designer, very excited. And we're also joined by Julien. Julien was on our second episode when we had a conversation with John Wick, and Julien has a role-playing game focused, themed podcast in France. Do you want to tell us a little bit about it, Julien, just to reintroduce, just in case anybody listening hasn't heard the episode with John?
So I'm Julien, Julien in French. We have the Voix d'Altaride podcast, in which you participate quite often,
Yes.
And we talk about topics about role-playing games and such things. And I guess that's all I have to say. It's only in French for now, but something tells me that we will have an episode in English soon.
Yes, we are. We're preparing a special episode of the Les Voix d'Altaride where I'm going to be talking to the whole crew in English, and we'll be talking about French role-playing game, and role-playing games altogether, and introducing all the group from the podcast to, English listeners, English-speaking listeners, essentially. All right. So, let's see where I wanted to start the conversation, Greg. I was just scrambling and trying to catch up. I've been late with everything, and I'm trying to prepare interesting questions or, make it interesting in any kind of way, but I'm sure it's going to be fun. I'm really looking forward to having this conversation. And, I remember I tried to get in touch with you a few times because you co-designed one of my favorite games called Unknown Armies, and I'm sure we'll have the chance to talk about it at length. And I was hoping to have this conversation because I'd heard there was going to be a third edition of the game. We didn't manage to talk before the crowdfunding campaign that happened recently, but instead we talk after, and I have the opportunity to say congratulations because it was pretty successful, right?
Thank you. Yes. We got pledges around $250,000, which is kind of a mind-boggling sum to me. And most of that is going to go into production. We have very fancy plans for how we want this to look, but still, it's a real achievement. It's a little humbling.
Well, that's really, really good. Was that a lot higher than what you expected, or?
I really went into this without any particular expectations. John Nephew was very, he was very ambitious about what he thought he could do. And, so I was, maybe a little more conservative in my estimates, but we certainly got more than we asked for, and we're going to be able to do a really good looking book. That's
really, really good. Excellent. And I saw that you've done a lot, and you do a lot of crowdfunding campaigns, smaller ones for works of fiction and other games. Did that make it that, because I heard from other people that running the crowdfunding campaign is really, really quite stressful and tiring, but you've had a bunch of experience. Did that help, or?
Well, I didn't have to run this one, which was lovely.
Oh, okay.
Running a crowdfunding campaign is like trying to tell everybody you know how wonderful you are and, basically browbeat them into liking you without becoming tiresome.
Yes.
So it's not an easy row to hoe. And if you're not a person who, really enjoys putting himself forward, it can be kind of a stressful or hellish experience. That said, I think it's a lot easier if you set your goals, lower and do, small things for small sums.
Yeah.
If you want to do something as big as the Unknown Armies Kickstarter was, you need to have a quantum level more of PR and advertising, which are things I've never done for my small ones. Because again, I'm cheap and not good at marketing.
Okay. Well, that's definitely something we'll come back to on the marketing side of things, because but first I wanted to say the interesting thing I was listening to when you were saying that was, as somebody who is working freelance at the moment, I guess like more or less like you, but not for as long. And, producing and promoting my podcast and wanting more people to read my weekly newsletter. I have no idea what basically putting myself forward and putting myself out there and trying to get more people to read it. So I think I relate to a certain extent a little bit, or at least, not for as long as you've been doing it, but,
Well, and yeah, it maybe gets easier in that, it becomes less stressful after you've run enough Kickstarters. You intuit their pattern, right? It's like a smile graph. The day it launches, there's a big burst of interest, which rapidly drops off. And then you enter this sort of doldrums period where not many people are pledging at all. And you sink into despair and tear your clothes and contemplate going back to work at the credit union. Yeah. But then at the end, it picks up again and doesn't usually get up to the level of launch, but there's usually a nice rush at the end.
Yeah. And I've heard from another conversation with someone that the lull period in the middle is exactly the one where you get a lot of people offering you magical services or, promoted to be as such that, if you put money here, you're going to get some more interest at that particular moment. But that needs to be planned in advance.
So little thought to those, as soon as I recognize that that's what the email is, I delete it and forget it.
Yeah, which is probably the right thing to do anyway.
Yeah. I'm like, I want these I want projects to succeed or fail on their own merit, not because of, tricks, gimmicks, or, PR.
Yeah.
And that's maybe a little unfair to all the hardworking marketing and public relations people out there. So perhaps a better way to say it is, I would rather miss a sale than sell something to someone who is then disappointed in it or feels, I didn't get my money's worth, or I was promised A and got B.
Yeah, that sounds like a good way to say it. Cool. Julien, you jump in anytime, right? So we'll just have a conversation where you just jump in anytime.
No, I have a question. Actually.
Okay.
I was wondering why I have such a long time between the start and the end of Kickstarters, if it works this way. What's the ideal duration for a Kickstarter?
I do a month just because I've always done a month. Maybe I did some longer ones before and noticed that, having it stretched out didn't seem to get any particular, didn't offer any particular advantage, but doing it shorter than a month would be very stressful to me, just because there would always be the thought in the back of my mind that, am I giving people enough time to hear about it? Am I giving people enough time to circulate the information? Because whenever I'm running a Kickstarter, inevitably in like week 3, I'll get someone saying, wait, is there a Kickstarter for this? I'm like, yes, I've been telling everybody for the past 3 weeks, every day, that there's a Kickstarter for this. And now you're just hearing about it. God bless you.
That's exactly what happened to me with Unknown Armies, even though I thought I was following everything it just skipped. I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, it breaks my heart to hear that.
Well, I did get it in time though.
What?
I got it in time. I was able to back it in time.
Okay. Well, maybe it was all just part of John's secret strategy to make you feel a sense of urgency. That, that would be a good trick, is to set it up so that on the day you launch, it looks like it's been going for 2 weeks.
So just for context, John Nephew, who is the director at Atlas Games, is that right? Who's publishing the game,
Atlas
right?
Games publisher, yes.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's sort of ultimately his baby, his responsibility, but the guy with the boots on the ground was Cam Banks, who developed the material and has been running the team. I don't know which of them actually ran the Kickstarter, because I was so delighted to not be running it that I didn't really care who else was doing it.
Sure.
Just like, I'm going to be so delighted to not have to pack up the boxes and mail stuff out that I don't care who does pack up the boxes and mail stuff out.
But we'll have a thought for them anyway.
What?
We'll have a thought for them and their hard work.
Yeah, yes. It's the life they chose. So, yeah, I mean, I have, in all the Kickstarters I've done where I wind up mailing out some tangible object, fulfillment is the worst part.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, hold on. Should we pause? There's a siren in the background.
That's okay. It makes it like, so you're, where are you right now? It sounds like you're somewhere exotic and dangerous to us Europeans.
I'm in Aurora, Illinois, in my office, in my house.
Of Wayne's World fame.
Yes, although the movie does not accurately depict Aurora.
No? Is it not really exactly like that?
No, there are no palm trees here.
They showed palm trees in the movie? Can't remember that.
And I think it was Wayne's World 2 where Aurora had palm trees, but yes. Now, interestingly, do you remember the bit of scenery I think it was in the original Wayne's World, where it was a bunch of cars stacked on top of each other on a spindle?
Yeah, I remember that.
That is in Chicagoland, but not Aurora.
Okay.
So I've been there. I think it's somewhere out near Cicero, but yeah.
So is it like an implement to attract people to, like, it's a big second-hand car sales place or work of art or both?
I think it used to be an advertisement for a used car lot, and then the used car lot closed down, but they kept the monument because it had become, a landmark, and people would say, oh, well, go till you see the spindle full of cars and then turn left.
Yes. So is that where you grew up? Were you from around the Chicagoland area? Or?
I'm from Iowa originally.
Okay. So not too far away, right?
It's about a 2-hour drive.
Okay.
So, born and raised in Iowa, just like Captain Kirk, and then lived in Syracuse for a couple years before moving out here in 1996, and I've been in Aurora ever since because I don't really like change very much. Okay,
got it. And so, going back to the beginning of the childhood and everything, how did you come across gaming and, tabletop gaming, role-playing games in the first place?
I must have been in 5th or 6th grade, and some friend had these books, and I'm like, whoa, what are those? I think the first one I had was the Green Box. I got the Green Box D&D with the Errol Otis cover.
I don't know what is the Green Box. I know the white one is the first one. Is the green one second or third? I don't really know.
It's fairly early in there. Okay. It was the one before they came out with Advanced Dungeons and Dragons.
Okay.
So it was the one that would take you through 3rd or 5th level.
Right.
And it just, I was like, well, this is great stuff.
Mm.
And then when a friend of mine who had the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, the books, the 3-book set with the monster manual and the Ifrit with the G-string and all that.
Yeah.
Their parents his parents forced him to get rid of them
So
I bought them on the cheap, and my dad was unimpressed. But look at me now.
Brilliant. So just to make sure, just for context and for reference for Julien as well, that I know a number of people who listen to this, of course, will be into tabletop gaming, but a number of people who listen to podcasts are not necessarily, because it's also a way to introduce gaming and principles of game design and different authors to different audiences. So just to make sure when we talk about like super geeky stuff or rules, just to remember to explain and go a bit like explain like I'm 5. Also because I don't even know all the different rule systems and certainly haven't played with all of them.
It's impossible to play, to be current on every aspect of, role-playing games and also be a complete human being. I'm just going to put that out there. I love my games, but I also do other things. So, I mean, there is just, and that's not a criticism. That's a great thing. It's like saying it's impossible to read every novel that is published.
Yes.
It is impossible to play every game that's worth playing.
Yes, and also impossible to read it. Absolutely. What are some of the other things? Actually, there's 2 questions. So one was, so you got excited about finding out about Dungeons and Dragons, and I was wondering, were you already like interested in, I don't know, like anything to do with fantasy books or comics or ghost stories, or what kind of stuff were you reading
pretty much
before
all
that?
Of the above.
All of it, yeah.
I grew up reading fantasy and science fiction. I've said this before, but I always saw myself as an adult being a writer, and I believed that I would be this literary writer, right? That, I would write realistic fiction that was deep and meaningful and depicted people coming to grips with things, and that I would be respected and revered for my tales about the human condition. And yet, all I read growing up was Heinlein, Asimov, Fritz Leiber, Stephen King. Everything I read, almost everything, was genre stuff. Mm-hmm. And then when I started writing on my own, I'm like, well, all my ideas are for horror and science fiction stuff, but I'll work up to the realism. Yeah. And so in college, I hit peak pretension and did write a number of realistic stories for, classes and literary, the college literary magazine and stuff. But also in college, I was involved in theater and had this friend named Mary Ettinger, who said to me, you know what? I know this guy who runs this game that you would probably like. And the guy was an insurance salesman named Jonathan Tweet. And the game he was running that she thought I would probably like was what eventually became Over the Edge. Right. And despite me being really annoying at first, I'm like, wait. Oh yeah, this is like Dungeons and Dragons, which I played in high school and junior high. Only it's not fair, and that blew my mind. The idea that there were, that you would encounter things that weren't a level appropriate challenge.
Can you explain a little bit about Over the Edge? Because it's a game I've never played. I would have loved and would love to play one day, but
Over the Edge is. It's the 20th century's version of, now it looks extremely prophetic, actually. It came out in, the early 90s, it must have been. Yeah, and so. It is set on an island called Alamarha. It's in the modern day, and I've heard it described as a role-playing game where everything you read in the tabloids is true. And so you are all people who have showed up on this sketchy, disreputable island that's, was inspired by the works of William S. Burroughs. And so there's spies everywhere and also, hedonistic drug tourists. And, that's on the surface. And underneath that, you've got the, ancient astronauts and alien races scheming to take over the world and sort of time travelers from the future trying to ensure that their future is the one that comes to pass. You've got Satanist mutants, all kinds of crazy stuff. And it presents itself as this sort of straightforward game of absurdism, if that's a phrase that has any meaning. And it's extremely, extremely free form, especially for its time. The thing that blew my mind about Unknown Armies, about Over the Edge, was that it allowed you to define your own characteristics. So you could say, my character is a cowboy. And, you didn't have to look on a list and say, oh, well, I've got to take lariat use and horseback riding and fancy shooting. No, you could just say, he's a cowboy. He does cowboy stuff.
Yeah.
And so it gave you a great deal of narrative freedom. And it also gave the GM it kind of throws the GM into the deep end of the pool if he or she is not used to non-dungeon structured adventures.
So like the person leading the game master GM, probably is going to have more responsibilities then, because it's a bit of more of a open sandbox type thing, do you think? Or
yes,
yep.
Sandbox is the word for it.
Yeah.
The GM has to be able to react on his feet, especially the way we were playing it at Tweet's house. He had this deck of cards that had plot developments written on them. They were whimsy cards, if you're familiar with the product.
No, I'm not actually. Sorry.
They were things like, somebody falls in love, or a stranger appears with an offer.
Similar to the mechanics in the game, a storytelling game like Once Upon a Time.
Yes, a little bit. And so the way the Tweet house rules for this was that these had been sold, and it was suggested that in a role-playing game, each player would get one to use once per session.
Okay.
So that they would have they would steal this little bit of narrative power from, what is traditionally the game master's hoard of narrative authority.
Right.
And the way Tweet played it was he gave every player 3 of them and said, okay, if you play this in order to help your character, it goes away. But if you play it to make the game more interesting for yourself or for someone else's character, then you draw a replacement. And this, he was doing it for fun, I'm sure, but it's hard not to now see it as sort of a Zen koan of, here is how, here's an object lesson in how people will really react to rules and what the true ramifications of these reward cycles are. Because, of course, all of us looked at our hand and thought, okay, this is the card that can save my life at some point. I'm not playing that. Yeah. These two are less useful. So, it would be hilarious to, play this one to mess up Mary's character. And then I might draw something that'll be more useful to me later. And so it was, it was a graphic example of how if you reward players for screwing each other, they will.
Yeah.
I don't know if you heard about a game that Jared Sorensen did called The Farm, which
no.
It's small, obscure, and I never played it, but I got a copy of it, and it is super duper bleak.
Okay.
The premise of The Farm is that you and the other players are people who have been kidnapped by a cabal of cannibal billionaires. And they have taken you to their secret island, the farm, where you are imprisoned. And they are fattening you up. And they're quite upfront about that. Yeah, well, we want you to gain weight, become well marbled and delicious, and then we will kill and eat you because human flesh pleases our palates, and we're sociopaths. Okay. That's the set.
Right.
Your goal is to escape, either collectively or singularly. But the rules, and I don't remember them super clearly, but the rules include a sort of brinksmanship mechanic where at any point you can say, I am the pig, which means I'm going to be incredibly selfish now. And if you become the pig, you take everyone else's successes that they've rolled. So you succeed at whatever you're doing, but everyone else fails.
That's quite interesting because I usually describe to anybody who doesn't really know much about role-playing games that it's a collaborative storytelling game. And they're not always the case. And certainly not this example. That sounds like really much more competitive than collaborative.
Well, it's, it was meant to play with questions of competition and collaboration. Another game that is also super bleak and, really goes directly to those questions is Steal Away Jordan by Julia Ellingbo. Do you know this one?
No, I don't. Julien, do you know it?
I've heard of it, yes.
So I played in a demo of that at Gen Con one year, and the premise of Steal Away Jordan is that you are all slaves in the pre-Civil War South. And so there is this tremendous tension built in to the setting and reinforced with the mechanics that, in order to survive, you cannot make your owner mad. You have to go along with your oppressor to a certain degree.
Mm-hmm.
But you also don't want to make enemies of all the other slaves. And so it's this sort of, it's a true horror game. It's where every decision is a difficult decision and where every moral outcome is ambiguous.
Mm.
Or if it's unambiguous, it's probably dangerous.
Mm-mm-mm.
If you try to just be the pure-hearted, born in a manger, does the good thing all the time, you will probably wind up crucified.
Mm.
So
actually, this is a fun topic because it's a conversation and or at least a theme that we've talked about a few times in Julien's podcast, but it's not come up in mine in the conversations I've had so far. So there are a bunch of different games where you have these kind of really deep moral dilemmas to work through, to explore, or to interpret. Why do you think it's fun to be playing that kind of game rather than being a flamboyant hero like in many popular kind of blockbuster movies or that kind of stuff?
Why is it fun to role play through a moral dilemma you would never want to face in real life?
Yeah.
And I will say as an aside that I also enjoy the sort of flamboyant, heroic, badass, uncomplicated, there are the Nazis, go kick them kind of games.
Sure.
But it is a different pleasure to face a really gnarly ethical dilemma. And I think the reason we like these is that it's hard to be a good person, and it's hard to think of yourself as a good person without contemplating difficult questions of this nature. Mm. I mean, you read the news and you hear about, there's a lot there's a sticky situation here, and I would not want to be the one who has to make decisions about how to handle the immigrant crisis in Europe, or I would not want to be the person who has to figure out, how to deal with the drug wars in Mexico. But you think about these things and they loom over you.
Yeah.
Or, it's like, I wouldn't want to have to be in charge of homeless policy in the United States. And they're always there in the background, right? These terrifying questions of, on one hand, they say that turning us into a surveillance state will make us more safe. But on the other hand, I don't really feel safe when I'm under constant surveillance. But, which kind of danger is the preferable one? And it never goes away. You never have the clean break where you say, okay, I choose this, and I'm going to stack all my chips here, go all in, and let's show our cards.
Yeah.
Real life does not lend itself to those kinds of final confrontations, but stories and games do. So stories and games with hard emotional and moral questions to them, you can play through that in a safe space because it's entirely imaginary, and you can get your hard break. You make your decision and you take your lumps and you see what the consequences are.
Yeah. And
this, I think, consoles us and helps us feel that we have a greater grasp on the issues of reality that we have examined through the lens of fiction.
Yeah. And perhaps also allows us to get a better grasp on some kind of, emotional aspect or empathy side of it, of having lived or, having experienced of a certain aspect, some difficult element or ethical choice that,
right.
is enriching by the end of it, or by the end of the experience, or at least fun in a way, and that kind of fun.
Well, the other aspect of it, that makes it sound like this. That makes it sound like gaming is so elevating and worthwhile that you should do it even if it isn't fun. The sort of id-based downside of that is, the Schadenfreude of, oh man, I'm sure glad I'm not in that situation. I read a book by, I think his name was Adam Neville, called The Ritual.
Okay.
Which is a horror novel set in the forests above the Arctic Circle. And before the supernatural weirdness even starts, the main characters are just screwed. They were not ready to go camping and hiking in the forests above the Arctic Circle. And so now they are lost, running low on food. One of them has a twisted ankle. They're just, you can just tell how, and he does a brilliant job of showing that they are really behind the eight ball, before the monster even shows up. And so this is a wonderful book to read while sitting on your couch under a blanket with, some hot coffee and a bowl of popcorn. And you're just like, oh, man, those guys are screwed. Oh, they're down to their last granola bar. Are they going to eat it now? Or are they going to save it for breakfast? Oh, poor saps. So there's this Schadenfreude aspect. And it's the same with Delta Green, is you'll come out of a Delta Green game. For your fans who are unfamiliar with Delta Green, it is like the X-Files if the universe was actively antagonistic and full of tentacle monsters. You are FBI agents who have to deal with things that are so much more powerful than humanity. And you can never, ever win. So all you are doing is fighting delaying tactics to, prevent this final reckoning.
Yeah.
And so when you're done with a Delta Green game, which, it's so anti-life that when you're done with it, your life suddenly seems like this unbelievable utopian paradise.
Right. Yeah.
And part of the fun of such games is that you can lose. Actually, you can fail, and there's little consequence about that. So in Delta Green, for example, is what you were saying.
There is a sidebar in the new Unknown. I think I put it in a sidebar entitled "Hooray for Failure."
Mm-hmm.
With the suggestion that if you remain true to your character, it will be a better story, even if you suck and die, because you will assuredly suck and die in an entertaining way, rather than merely surviving in this sort of weedy, indecisive mode.
Yeah.
And your character will be much more interesting this way too. Not only the story.
Mm-hmm. The characters people bore you with their stories about at conventions for years to come are the ones who died really cool deaths.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And generally that's what makes fiction. Well, actually, look at how many people are talking about Game of Thrones and essentially like the amount of crazy deaths that all the characters are having. It's not the only reason people are talking about it, but it is certainly one of the reasons people are talking about it.
And then I walked up to Darth Vader and said, "You ain't shit to me, Dark Lord of the Sith." I didn't last long, but it was worth it for the expression on his... Well, it wasn't really an expression on his face. It was more body language.
Interesting. So another thing I was interested in looking at, and I was looking at the different games that you worked on and helped design, and I don't know if there was just the way that it was described on reading on your website, but it sounded like there's several people that came to you for talking about and supporting and collaborating on rule systems. Like it seems like John Tynes had the idea of the universe for Unknown Armies, and so I was wondering did you become more of an expert on rule systems or known for that, or not particularly, or?
I guess I did. What happened with Tynes is that he was not that interested in writing up a coherent rules system. And that was when I was sort of at the beginning of my career. I had learned from Jonathan Tweet that it was possible to get paid money, real money, which could be exchanged for goods and services, to make up stuff for these games. And I'm like, well, I want in on that.
Is that where you kind of gave up on the great American novel, or? At
some point. Well, no, I was still writing my literary things, but I got a lot more traction a lot faster with the game stuff. The barriers for entry at Shadis Magazine were, I think it's fair to say, considerably lower than at the New Yorker.
Right.
And so he, pointed me at Jolly Blackburn and said, "Hey, this is Greg. He can write stuff." And I started pitching things to Jolly, who started accepting them. And, I'd been playing Over the Edge before it was published, so I was in a good position to write supplemental material for it. Mm-hmm. John Tynes, Robin Laws, and I all hooked onto one aspect of the Over the Edge setting and said, "Wow, that's really cool. I want to write about that." And so we each wrote our different take on it. And so he'd read my work in Wildest Dreams, which was the book the three of us did together, kind of did together separately. But, so he felt that I was, at least not a total flake or quack, and came to me with Unknown Armies, or with what would become Unknown Armies, and said, "Hey, I'm kind of burned out on Call of Cthulhu because that's all I've been doing, and I want to do something that's a different kind of horror." And so I looked at what he had and added some stuff to it, and he looked at what I'd added and said, "Oh, that makes sense. Let's do this and this." And it was a very, very fun and fruitful collaboration.
So actually, we might be able to take this as an example, because we were talking about, and this might be the interesting counterpart, particularly, well, I'm interested anyway, but also for people who don't really know much about role-playing games, because we talked about the ethical situations or moral dilemmas and interpreting a character through those. And how does it work from creating rules that make or mimic that kind of, or make or allow that kind of moral dilemmas to happen? Where do you start, or where did you start in that particular case?
Well, where did we start? Hold on. The phone is ringing. Oh, will one of my sons answer the phone? Let's find out.
Suspense.
It's probably a robot. The robots are calling me all the time. So, how do you inject a moral dimension into your games?
Or rules into the moral dimensions that you already determined.
How do you have rules that support a moral dimension?
Or an atmosphere altogether. I mean, whichever, it's fine.
Right. Okay. Well, to get a horror feeling, there always has to be a lot at risk. So if you have a set of, if you set up a game where a gunshot does at most 10 points of damage and where everyone starts out with 100 hit points, no one's going to be scared of getting shot by a gun. Yes. At least not till they've been shot 9 or 10 times already.
Yeah.
So that's a very simple example. You want to have people be close to loss. And the closer they are to loss, the more frequently, the more scary it will be. Another element to it is having different trajectories of loss, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
In the example of Dungeons and Dragons, a robust and seminal role-playing experience, traditionally there's only like 3 things that you can lose, maybe 4. You can lose hit points and die, but that's not even permanent. And hit points are easy to get back generally if you've got a cleric in the party or a bunch of healing potions. Mm-hmm. So hit points, not that scary. You can lose your plot goals, but generally you don't, because a lot of, the big D&D campaigns are always save the world, like Return to the Temple of Elemental Evil. So if you lose that, the game's over and it's really over.
Yeah.
So that's a big threat, but you're going to have at least 8 sessions of play before you screw the pooch so hard that, annihilation wins.
Yeah.
So that's not, it's in the background, but it's not up in your face all the time. In my experience with Dungeons and Dragons, the thing that the monsters that really scare people are, and this is probably changed in 5th edition, but it's rust monsters and vampires. And the reason is because they introduce these 2 new avenues of loss. Rust monsters don't take your hit points. Rust monsters take your stuff.
Yeah.
And getting stuff is a really important element of old school D&D. Mm. Your equipment goes as far to making you a powerful hero as a lot of other things. So something comes along that can just casually destroy that +5 plate mail that makes you awesome. That's terrifying.
Right.
And the other thing is, vampires and energy drain monsters take your levels. So you go from being a 10th level awesomeness guy to, oh no, now I'm merely 8th or 5th. And it's tremendously disempowering because you work so hard for those XP to get those levels. And then, along comes Strahd and, oh no, I think I want you to be a baby again.
Got it.
So those are the avenues of loss in D&D, and 2 of them are very specific, and one of them is not really that big of a deal, and one of them is way off in the background. So D&D is very rarely a horror game.
Yeah.
Compare with Delta Green. Now, the avenues of loss in Delta Green are, if you fail, terrible things are going to happen to ordinary people real soon and probably continue. So that's alarming. You're not trying to save the world. You're trying to save like this one cul-de-sac and the families on it who never did anything wrong. Mm. So that's scary. You have hit points. You can die in Delta Green pretty easily. It's not hard to get shot twice and bleed out.
Yeah.
So you creep around those cultists pretty carefully because, you don't know if one of them's got a machete, and a machete is a scary thing in Delta Green. What we've also added is there's a social dimension, which is that you have bonds to like your family and your church and your coworkers. And you can choose in certain instances in the new version of Delta Green to protect your sanity by withdrawing from the people who give your life meaning. Or you can exploit those bonds. It's like, I really, really need the money to, buy this certain thing. So I'm going to have to borrow it from my brother-in-law, knowing that I can't pay him back and that this will screw things up between me, him, and my wife. So that's another avenue of loss, and it's one that gaming's aging demographic can relate to in the way that, because, marriage problems is a lot more realistic than losing your +5 plate to a rust monster.
Yes.
And then the real pièce de résistance, did I pronounce that right?
Quite right, yes.
Good enough for an Iowan, is the sanity rules. And if you haven't played Call of Cthulhu or Delta Green, the way sanity works is there's a single stat that measures how close you are to cracking up, how close you are to being unable to cope with reality. And it'll 100. In reality, you're not going to start out much higher than 70 or 80 and goes to 0. Mm-hmm. And if you hit 0, you're out of touch with reality. Before you hit 0, you will develop some aberrations, some, psychological syndromes where you might become an alcoholic or you might develop a crippling fear of something. And these are meant to grow out of whatever it is that caused you to lose your sanity. But the cruel, surprisingly accurate part of it is that it's a death spiral. So anytime you lose sanity, your ability to prevent further losses to sanity is diminished.
Yeah.
So you start out succeeding a lot and only losing a little bit. But the more you lose, the less likely to succeed you are. So there is this sort of hockey stick graph where once you start to go bad, rapidly get worse and worse until your character is, unplayable.
Yeah.
And this is really scary. This is what makes Call of Cthulhu work above and beyond all the atmospherics, is that it has a mechanic in place that tracks your loss of you.
Yeah. And in this system, are the aberration of the mind that you were speaking about, are they random or do you choose them? Or maybe the game master chooses them?
In earlier editions, they were random. I would guess. I haven't read 7th edition really carefully. I think I've got 4th and 5th on my shelf. I think they were random in 4th. I would guess that by now they've, fixed it so that you and your GM should negotiate on one that fits the circumstances and fits the character. Mm-hmm. It used to be random, and it's like, and which I felt was, would be a little bit of a suspense breaker if you're like, okay, I was smothered by giant bats and I rolled and now I'm a nymphomaniac? No, yeah. That's not right. I know that in Delta Green, it's, okay, figure out exactly how this messed you up and why. And that is the kind of damage you will receive. Mm. And we encourage people to be cruel to their own characters because, again, there's that weird, separated masochism of, oh, well, let's see how bad I can make things for my guy. Half the pleasure of Delta Green is watching your character suffer. It's inexplicable to me, but it's there.
Mm.
Yeah, in a small French game called Someone, mm-hmm. an horror game too, you decide at the beginning when you create the character what aberrations he will gain during the play. So is that yeah? Sorry.
Are you then fated to get that, or it's like this is what will happen if things go badly?
I guess it's a bit of both because in this game you play victims in horror movies, so you okay. will end up mad or dead. It's not really fate, but in fact it is.
No, but at least the player has the agency that the character lacks.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
that's the kind of thing. That's the kind of thing that can be very fun with gaming. Even if you don't, even if you play it in a way that you don't analyze, But the separation between the character's agency and the player's agency can be very interesting, and it can drive a lot of creativity on the part of the player when, okay, I know that in certain circumstances, because I'm playing a character who is, say, an addict, I know that if I wind up in a situation where I'm tempted, that I will just succumb. I know that I will. So the player has to strategize around that. And there's this interesting tension between the player's goals and the character's goals. A different way to play with that is that you provide rules that incentivize things that are bad for the character. I wrote a fantasy game called Reign, and REIGN. And one of the mechanics in it was that you pick out a weakness for your character. And when he is pursuing his weakness, he gets advantages. So if you say, oh, his weakness is, again, that he's an addict, it's like, well, if he goes out to rob someone so that he can get the substance to which he is addicted, he will roll better. He will roll more dice in his pool. If your noble impulse is that you always help the poor and downtrodden, you will get a die added to your pool if you're helping the poor and downtrodden. But the flip side of this is that if you resist one of these, you lose a die from your pool. So if you're like, okay, now I'm going to help exploit the poor and downtrodden, now you have a penalty to all your rolls. And if you decide, no, I'm going to be good and I'm not going to go buy drugs, then you are penalized on your rolls because, I'm jonesing. So, that moves it to a tactical level, right? It's like, do I want to get these extra dice, but lose the freedom to act as I see fit in the plot? Or do I want to go along with these things that I myself defined in order to get advantages? Or do I want to go against character just because it's more interesting and struggle because I do?
Cool. Actually, can we move a little bit to talk a little bit about Unknown Armies? And you mentioned earlier that John Tynes came to you thinking he wanted to do a different kind of horror than the games we just talked about, Call of Cthulhu. Could you tell us a little bit more about it and maybe talk a little bit about the third edition as well?
Okay. Well, the things that he was fed up with, he'd read Foucault's Pendulum by Umberto Eco, which makes it very hard to take classical occultism seriously. It is a book about sort of the plot of the book is that these guys make up this fake occult rumor and all these paranoid occultists believe them. And then the fun starts. And so it's very hard to take, Theosophy and the Knights Templar and all that old stuff that sounds good the farther you are from it. It's harder to enjoy that when you've read Foucault's Pendulum. And the other thing is that if you actually try and read, Blavatsky, oh man, that stuff is dense and dull. And it's like the closer you get to it, the less interesting it becomes. And so there had been a large vein of that classical occultism in his pagan publishing work. And so he's like, yeah, I've done that. I want to do something that's not that. And the other thing that is a major theme of the mythos work he'd been doing at Pagan is human beings are, dust on the cosmic road. They don't matter. They don't have any power. They try to do things, but by and large, they are the things to which things are done. People are just, we have no point.
Yeah.
And so he wanted to explore in a different direction, which is that, no, people have a very important role in the universe. That, in fact, everything that happens to us because we collectively wanted it that way.
And that's one of the things I really, really enjoyed about the Unknown Armies book, actually.
It is, it's horror about democracy, which always seems extremely relevant, doesn't it?
Yes.
So I think it was Roy Rogers who said democracy is the theory that people know what they want and deserve to get it good and hard. So in Unknown Armies, the horror arises not because we are helpless to, prevent Mexican drug wars and immigrant crises and homelessness, but because we could stop all those things. We have the power to end these horrendous social ills. We just lack the will. We could have fixed global warming, but we wanted the iPhone instead. And this is this is what is uncomfortable, is that, you could make a change, but will you? And we've brought this more to the forefront in third edition. We've included a mechanic that we focused on called the objective. So when you start out, your game of Unknown Armies, you're supposed to start out without any really concrete ideas about who your character is or what they're doing. And the first thing you decide is, what is our cabal's objective? What is it that they are trying to do? What do they want to get or have happen? And so you start with your objective. And then, only then, once you know that your objective is, we're gonna solve homelessness in our city. There will be no more homelessness in our town. Once that's your objective, you build characters and say, okay, this is why my character cares so much about this and is involved with the cabal, and this is what they bring to the table. Mm-hmm. So the characters start out with a cohesive objective, a group goal, and they start out with good reasons to care about it and to work towards it.
Yeah, and that's something that's interesting, because it was kind of like recommended in the previous edition, but not necessarily formalized as far as I remember it. So I played a campaign last year with a group of friends in the south of France, and that was our first session. Our first session was to create the characters, but particularly the first thing I asked them as a group was, all right, so before you even start making up what kind of characters you are, you got to explain to me why you're working together and what you're trying to do.
Yes. Well, the constant criticism of the earlier versions of Unknown Armies was, this is a really cool setting and there's a lot of great details, but what do you do with it? And, D&D, you can say what you want about the save the world plot lines. They're motivating. You know exactly what you're trying to do. Yeah. Your motive is to save the world, because that's where you keep all your +5 plate mail.
Yeah.
In Vampire the Masquerade, it's like, okay, your goal, you're a vampire, you got to get fed and not get caught.
Yeah.
At the very bottom, you agree on that. And so the strength of those games was that they had this implicit play structure, which Unknown Armies did not have.
Yeah.
And
it was interesting. Sorry, just to cut you off, but when we're talking about like games that have more freedom also come with more responsibility potentially. Because I loved the setting and I loved reading the book immediately. In my late teens, I tried to run the game and I was laughed out of the room. Basically, in my 20s, people thought it was just like super weird and didn't understand what the hell it was about. And it's only until like last year, really my 30s, that I managed to run an actual campaign properly this game.
Oh man, I hope we haven't made a game for 40-year-olds. I mean, gaming's aging demographic is a thing and all, but still.
I hope not. But maybe, anyway, sorry, I interrupted you in the middle of what you were saying.
No, that's okay. I have been going on, which is probably why my throat's getting gravelly.
It's part of the point, to making you talk is why we're here.
We did want to take the flaw of not having an implicit goal and make it a feature by saying, okay, no, you decide what your goal is. You decide what you're trying to achieve. Here are the metrics by which you do this. And so you have your objective, which starts out at 0, and you work it over the course of, numerous sessions until it hits 100, at which point the thing you're trying to achieve occurs. If you get it up to 100, you can solve homelessness in your town. And there's, rules and guidelines in place for how you improve your objective and how the GM should track this and what the GM should do in response to the rising objective, because it's very much a thing where, all right, so I know we're getting close. So at this point in the plot, I need some kind of climax because their objective is at 90%. And so soon everything's going to change. And I know this.
Mm-hmm.
So it gives the GM a bit of a heads up, which is more than you'll get in the most pure of sandbox games, which we'll use Over the Edge as an example of a very, very pure sandbox game, because there you just come to the island doing whatever. You wind up in a group with these other tourists because whatever, and the GM has to react to you wandering around doing whatever. It's very, very sandboxy, which is great for the players because they get all kinds of crazy freedom and can get their yayas out. But it's very, very difficult for the GM, who has little guidance about how to turn how to weave these many disparate threads into, some kind of story loincloth.
Yeah.
With D&D as an example of a very non-sandboxy, the most classical D&D is the least sandboxy game you can imagine, because it's like, okay, there is a series of rooms and you can go through the rooms in any order you like, but there's only these rooms. And if you leave the dungeon, well, the dungeon is where the game is.
Yeah, you fall off the edge of the world. There's nothing else there. It's just blank. Well, you can fill it up, of course, but
or the GM ferociously shucks and jives and rolls on the random encounter chart. So between those two poles, I was trying to get something that had the advantages of each and diminishes the disadvantages of both. And so objectives, I think, offer a way to build a railroad through the sandbox. It's still empowering to the players because they get to determine what their objective is, and they set ways to pursue it. But the GM has the advantage of, okay, I know what they're going to, I have some idea of where things are going to go because the players have told me what they are going after and how they're going after it. And, that is the nightmare for a sandbox GM is that, you show up with all these ideas in place and the players say, no, we've decided we're going to go, we're going to buy a boat and start smuggling. Yeah. And you're like, I don't know anything about boats or smuggling, but now I have to fake it all.
Yeah.
So here, the players at least have to warn you before they surprise you, which mitigates the surprise greatly. And also, the other problem with sandbox games is that pacing can be very difficult, in that, your characters might get a set of hot dice and suddenly, on the second session, they've killed the villain they weren't supposed to even meet until the 10th session.
Yeah.
But with objectives, you don't, being, much more abstract and less villain based, you can pace things better because you know how close they are to getting what they want. And the game, from the GM's perspective, there's a lot of advice about, okay, here is how you get people to reconsider their objective. And here is how you distract them from their objective. And here is how you throw up roadblocks to their objective. And so it's all built around that. They build the track, but you can build a lot of sidings off of it.
Yes.
And it also says, okay, and if they decide to change their objective or burn it for, another reason, accept that. That's cool. Perhaps the people who are trying to end homelessness in their town, which is a laudable goal, find out that something much worse is happening, that there is a conspiracy afoot to sink the whole town into the ground. It is just going to, there's going to be an earthquake and everyone dies. Well, they may decide to sacrifice their objective in order to balk that worse objective, which is mechanically supported. And it's like, if they do that, that's the story, except where they want to go with it.
Got it. Cool. I was just being conscious for time, and I had a couple of more questions before we finish. Are we doing? You have a few more minutes, or?
Yeah, sure. I do not have to be anywhere for like another half hour, probably.
All right, cool.
So yeah, ask your questions before my voice gives out.
Okay, Julien, did you want to ask one? Actually, I realized we do have a little bit more time.
Yeah, I was thinking about these objectives. Do the players have one objective or multiple ones in Unknown Armies?
Collective objective.
One
single collective objective.
And when they get it, the game ends?
No. You can then roll it. You can either start over with an entirely different objective, or you can take some of the points from your successful objective and roll them into a related objective. So if you succeeded at eradicating homelessness, you could take some of those points, and if it was like, okay, now we're going to work on the homeless problem in the next town over using what we've learned here, then you could start partway completed. Or you could say, okay, no, instead our objective is going to be to root out every last member of the earthquake cult and, find all the copies of the earthquake summoning ritual and get rid of them. That you would start that objective at 0.
Okay.
So
because
it does have the potential of, okay, we're just going to keep succeeding at smaller and smaller and less relevant things because we don't want to lose all our points, versus, okay, we're just going to bite the bullet, make a radical pivot and do something new and start at 0.
Okay, because, one of the flaws of campaigns is that they seem to never end. And with your objective systems, it seems to me that you can foresee an ending point for your campaign. And that's quite good.
Well, a lot of campaigns, I think, spin their wheels because, if everyone's having fun and showing up, once a week for a year and enjoying the campaign, that's great. If you're having fun, you're doing it right. But you can reach this point of diminishing returns where people are having less fun and it doesn't seem cool anymore, but it's hard to know when to finally, stick a fork in it and say it's done. And yeah, objectives definitely give you big glowy sign points where you can end it here, and so there's advice on that where, you reached your goal, you've reached your objective. Okay, great. End the game, declare victory, go home, play a different game, or start, take a break or start a different game of Unknown Armies, either completely unrelated to the events of your previous objective or sort of spinning orthogonally off of it. So, one suggestion is that, okay, how do you run a game where it's 5 years later, all your old characters who were the heroes have lived long enough to become the villains. And, now your objective is to undo what they did or correct the mistakes the GM has forced onto them. And, some groups wouldn't dig that because they aren't going to want to see their characters turned into antagonists. Others, on the other hand, I'm betting would really, really love it.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
I remember a friend of mine who had run this very lengthy game. He's like, okay, we're going to run a D&D game where everyone has to be evil. And so ran this long, successful, level 1 to 10 game of evilry where everyone was just anti-paladining it up and conquering swaths of land and, enslaving the forest sprites and everything, and ended in this, gigantic dystopian victory for the forces of bad, which everyone really liked, but, had gotten tired of. And so then after a couple month pause, they're like, oh, we should play a D&D again. He's like, okay, I have an idea. You're all first level characters. You're all good. And you're living in the dystopia that your last characters created. Your job, the arc of the campaign is to defeat your former evil characters. And, they're all like, oh, I know exactly why I hate those guys.
Yeah. Brilliant. So I also remember the previous edition was kind of split up between the levels of knowledge that your character has. So like, and it was organized, the book was organized like this as well. So like the more you went into the book and the more you found out about the weirdness of the world and different kind of like magic conspiracies and stuff like that. Is it still kind of organized this way, or?
It is not.
All right.
We decided to be less coy about the center of the world in Unknown Armies. And so,
so we can talk about it.
Yes. Players start out knowing, at least the broad outlines of how the cosmos works. Mm-hmm. And they therefore have the option of having characters who know this as well. The assumption is that if you're playing Unknown Armies, the game of weird occultists with strange cosmological beliefs, you can start out as a weird occultist with strange cosmological beliefs. Although I've tried, as always, very hard to not make it so that so that you don't feel like you're the sidekick if you're not the guy with the funky magic powers. Crazy magic powers in Unknown Armies come with high and ongoing costs.
Yeah.
So if you want to be able to, kill a guy with your mind, you can build that, but you are going to have a lot of deficits compared to the guy who's just like, no, I'm going to kill a guy with my gun and badge. And, I know I'll get off in court. That's how cops do.
And sometimes it becomes a little bit, or at least my experience before, a bit difficult possibly to organize a coherent group, particularly when there's different people who want different crazy powers that are not easy to manage in game.
To reconcile.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which I think is a problem that the objective rules are gonna address too.
Yourself, yeah.
I did some work on Vampire the Masquerade back in the day,
mm-hmm.
and wrote for the player advice book. And one of the pieces of advice, one of the articles I had to write was, how to make it so that the whole game isn't about player characters squabbling and striving against each other.
Mm.
And so and basically I'm just like, okay, build your character half for yourself and half for the other characters, or for the other players. Because if they are all, unemployed gangster rappers and you're a, Ku Klux Klan member, how are they ever going to work together? It's not going to be a buddy cop film. It's going to be a mess.
Yeah.
And your poor GM is not going to be able to manage this. She's got enough on her plate without having to build, 20 miles of plot excuses out to one character's Unabomber shack out in the wilderness.
Hmm.
And so I tried to incorporate that notion very deeply into the DNA of Unknown Armies, because it did have, the advantage of being able to make really weird, really interesting, really unique characters came with the drawback that it could be very hard to make team players.
Yeah. So
now it starts with the assumption that they are team players while still letting you make very weird, unique characters.
Cool. So the crowdfunding campaign finished, but can people do people who haven't participated have to wait until it's out in stores, or can they still participate in anything, or how does it work?
Oh, let me see if it's on Backerkit. I know they're planning to do that. I know they're working through that, but I don't know if they've got it up. I think they do. let me hit up the old internet and search for Unknown Armies Backerkit. Because I think you can still get in on it even if you didn't pledge. Let's see what comes up. Hey, look at that. Unknown Armies 3rd edition role-playing game, Backerkit.
Cool.
And yes, so...
And I'll add the link in the show notes if it's still on. Yeah, I'll add the link in the show notes. Cool. Great. All right, I usually finish and wrap up with a few, what I'm calling the cool down questions, and it's the Ice Cream for Everyone podcast, so I usually include some kind of, or wedge in rather, some kind of ice cream related questions. Starting with favorite ice cream flavor, if any, if you...
I have to go with vanilla, which I know is boring.
No. I mean, I really love vanilla. It's I really love vanilla. Another question I've not asked, so I always do experimental ice cream questions as well. Do you remember any tabletop role-playing game sessions where ice cream appeared in some interesting fashion? And it could be in-game or out-of-game.
I honestly do not.
How about you, Julien, by any chance?
I honestly do not. We were more of we would snack on salty snacks and then drink caffeinated beverages with them.
Yes, I'm more of the salty
I would think
snacks
ice cream would make my character sheet sticky.
Yes, it probably would. Did you have a salty snack of choice then?
Salty snack of choice. Any kind of chips and dip.
Chips and dip. All right, good choice. Julien, any
get
ice cream related?
The 7-layer dip and a good thick chip that can support it. That's practically a meal.
Yes, it is definitely the several layer dip, but practically a meal. Absolutely. Cool. And Julien, any?
No. I don't have any.
No LARPing and ice cream. No,
not really.
Okay.
No. I can't think of anything.
The risk of these kinds of questions is sometimes people just completely blank, but sometimes I get some I ask these random ice cream questions and I have I have this amazing story, but no, not this time.
Well, I will try and include ice cream in book 4 of Unknown Armies.
Maybe there's an ice cream cult of some kind. I don't know.
I'm thinking the really creepy ice cream truck.
Yes.
You must have ice cream trucks everywhere, right? Where it's drive through the neighborhood with the horrible music blasting and annoy you, and then your kids say, Dad, can we get ice cream? Can you give me $3?
That's certainly in London. I actually, that reminds me, I'll add in the show notes. I read and listened to a fantastic story of 2 ice cream trucks that were fighting for territory over the course of several years, and that grew in empires and trying to steal each other's territories, and it's like a really long feature story in I think it's called Epic Magazine. I'll send over the link because that's a fantastic story and inspiration, I think, for something Unknown Armies. Really good.
My objective is that I'm going to drive that other ice cream bastard out of business. I will eat a rock top on their graves.
You suddenly find out that they're purveying not just ice cream, and their customers are maybe not human.
Yep, there you go. That would work.
Otherwise, on my day job, I'm working marketing and branding. Do you have a favorite brand?
A favorite brand of ice cream?
No, not just ice cream. That's just a brand overall, not necessarily.
Oh, a favorite brand of anything?
Anything, whatever you want.
Man. Oh, wow, that's hard to think of. I'm awfully fond of Tanqueray gin.
Okay.
And not just because it's gin, but, I've actually tried more expensive gins, but find that I like this one better. It's still a high-end product. I started drinking gin and tonics in college. Mm-hmm. And, because I didn't have a lot of money, I would just get the cheapest gin I could find. And so for a while, I thought that gin actually was supposed to have a little bit of that nail polish remover taste to it. And then I'm I discovered Tanqueray, and I'm like, no, this is everything I like about gin without that weird astringency.
Yeah, it's a nice gin.
And so, I tried the cucumber gin, and I'm like, this is just trying too hard. Mm. And I had Bombay Sapphire for a while. I had a bottle of that a friend gave me, and I'm like, this is a beautifully produced product, but I honestly think I prefer the taste of Tanqueray. And at the end of the day,
in London at the moment, there's at the end of the day, the taste matters most.
Yeah. At the end of the day, it's my tongue that has to deal with the gin and not my eyes that have to deal with the bottle.
Yes, absolutely. Well, there's a lot of like small producers gin, and there's a whole trend in London, and I think there's some of that trend in just like new kind of craft or craft small produced distilleries. Is there any of those for gin in the States, or do you know of any of those kind of trendy little distilleries?
I'm sure there are. Surely there are. Actually, when my wife and I went on a trip for our I think it was 25th wedding anniversary, we were touring all these wineries, and there was a distillery in the region of Michigan that we were in. And the distillery, I was looking forward to it. I got some of their like craft whiskey, but I wasn't super impressed. What the spirit that really got me was we went to this, I can't remember what the name of the vineyard was, which I'm sure the people who own that vineyard would love it if I could, had specifically recommended this. But we went and did, a tasting where it's like, okay, you get to try 4 different wines, and they also had grappa. I found out later that it was not technically grappa; it was technically Pomance brandy, because you can't call it grappa unless it's from certain regions in Italy or Switzerland. But this winery ignored that entirely and had this stuff they call grappa. And Martha, my wife, decided she was going to try the grappa, and they put the glass in front of her, and she picked it up and didn't even bring it to her mouth before going, "Oh, this is too strong. I'm feeling drunk from the vapors. Here, Greg, you drink it." And so I tried this, this Pomance brandy, which is, if you don't know what grappa or Pomance brandy is, they take the garbage after you're done pressing wine. They take all of the stems and skins and all the stuff that got crushed out, and use that as the basis for a liquor mash. And what comes out is this clear, white, strong, kind of harsh brandy, and I really dug it. So
in France, it's still a tax.
I got a tiny bottle of that, and it's still what?
Sorry, I was saying my sister is a winemaker in France. My sister has a vineyard in the south of France, and in France, it's a tax. It's a government tax that dates from Napoleon laws, that all the leftover mash, when you press your wine, you have to give over to a government-owned distillery, and they're going to sell it back to like a privately owned distillery afterwards.
Oh man!
Yeah, and that's where I think
undemocratic.
Yes, I think that's where our cheap alcohol comes from.
So yes.
All right, cool. Is there anything? Thank you.
The government sells cheap alcohol.
Yeah,
that is kind of brilliant, though.
It's kind of brilliant. It's kind of brilliant. I'm not sure exactly how it works, or if they somehow set it back to Pernod Ricard, and I really don't know if that's exactly how it happens, but I know that you have to give it over to the government-owned distillery, that's for sure. What they do with it and how the chain goes back into the stores, I'm not sure exactly how it happens. But hey, it's quite interesting. Thanks for that. That's awesome. So, to finish off, though, I'll add all the links in the show notes. Do you have any other? So you're obviously pretty busy with Unknown Armies right now. Anything else that's coming up exciting in the future for you, like new publications or new projects or anything else?
Let's see. The projects I've got working on. Unknown Armies, I'm writing the 4th book for that, and am, head down in that. I've got a series of Delta Green scenarios that need to be edited and updated, but I'm waiting for feedback before I get into those. But that'll drag on for a while. Yeah. I have written an Unknown Armies novel that Atlas Games has no interest in publishing, so I'm sitting on that trying to figure out how I can make $10,000 off of that. That is my goal.
Okay.
I want to, release this novel and have $10,000 after releasing it.
Got it.
So I should probably talk to someone about that.
Yeah.
And also I have a sort of embryonic science fiction game that I'm working on, Termination Shock, that I was getting ready to playtest online, but then life happened to like two or three of the people in my playgroup, so that's on hold for now. But I would like to try and find a series of playtesters who are sort of outside of the gaming demographic. You know, there is this hardcore of grognards, but I would like to, get some non-grognard players for the initial introduction to this.
Got it.
Because I work making games that are at a smaller and smaller segment of the game buying public.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get into that kind of bubble.
No, absolutely. And I totally agree.
So that's what I'm working on. Those 4 things are
excellent
at stages.
Brilliant. All right, cool. Well, listen, thank you very much for your time. And I'll be adding your links to your website and to your Twitter and everything else. And, have a fantastic day. And I'll be looking forward to seeing the 3rd edition of Unknown Armies and everything else you're working out and coming out soon.
All right. Well, feel free to ask me back on when projects come to fruition.
All right.
Talk to you later.
Okay, well, that's another episode of the Ice Cream for Everyone podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate. I hope you enjoyed it. At least, it's the thing I say almost every time. I can't help myself, but you enjoyed it enough to listen to now. Sorry about the glitches towards the very end. I think they were just about okay, but, sorry about that again. Sometimes it happens, it's random Skype occurrences. I'm having these conversations with guests in the States and other parts of the world. So I prefer risking those kinds of glitches than limiting myself to only face-to-face. I really, really love face-to-face conversations, but to be able to keep up the rhythm and talking with people everywhere in the world, well, conferencing and calls are really quite practical and useful. So, and sometimes people don't really have any other time or they can't do it any other way. So anyway, if you enjoyed the episode, how about sharing it with a friend? Just send them a link to the file or share it on your favorite social network. As you know, and as I repeat myself, I just want for more people to listen to this, right? And check it out. And the same if you have more feedback, questions, comments, I'd love to hear from you too. You can contact me on Twitter. My username is @HippoWill. You can post a comment and like the Ice Cream for Everyone page on Facebook. You can leave a review on iTunes, or the iPhone podcast app, because I think that's what most people use. Or send me an email, drop me an email. It's Willem, WILLEM, @icecreamforeveryone.net. And that's about it for now. Thank you so much for listening again. I really appreciate it. Look out for the next episode next week. Oh yeah, as I said, I'm wrapping up the season, so there's only a few episodes left to the season. But I have some exciting episodes coming up. And so watch out for that. I'll be taking a break over the summer, but I'll be talking more about that in the intros of the next couple of weeks. Anyhow, have a great day, evening, morning, whatever time it is for you, and see you soon. Bye-bye.